Hey, well, looks like the minion in Pawtucket is not going on anymore.
Ramat is out of town. And
Well,
when
what happened to
Ramat's out
Marvin?
of town-
Marvin just disappeared.
Yeah.
He doesn't like that. That's strange.
Okay. Well, we are live to everyone watching here and far. Hopefully Marvin will come back. And Marvin
His
is back.
internet went down. That could have happened.
There he is.
Oops, sorry
So
about that.
Marvin,
Baruch Nechaya Mesim. Yeah. Welcome back.
Ramat is out of town. When Ramat's out of town, it's
Ramat is the only one who's good at organizing.
Okay,
So-
so you'll let me know when we started again.
Did you show up, by the way, tonight?
Yeah.
You know,
You're not on
the truth is,
I'm sorry. We should be doing Talmud.
no, that's okay. We are, we could talk about this and, okay, I have thoughts.
We're live.
We're live. The congregation Bethlehem, as we like to say, if you don't like organized religion, this is the shul for you. And although I will say, since the president of the board and the chief rabbi is here, that it actually is more organized now than it's ever been. So let's just say that. Okay, and it's quite organized. We're doing the Gemara, and as we've said for the last 6 sessions, we may finish the last chapter in Masechus Megillah tonight, or we may not. Now, we had discussed something last time, and I just wanted to note, we discussed this idea that in lieu of offering the sacrifices, you could recite the sacrifices. And we cited Tosafos, who says, that's the reason for this custom to read a second Torah on Yom Tov, where you read the Korbanos, was this midrash. But there is, and I wanted to, actually, if I do this share, do you see now a different thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the Torah and the Beis Yosef. People may know. The Beis Yosef was Rav Yosef Karo's extended commentary on the Torah. The Shulchan Aruch is just really the cliff notes. And so if you really want to learn what the source is and understand how Rav Yosef Karo was reading the sugyas, the Beis Yosef is where you want to be. We rarely go there.
Is the cliff notes. I thought Orach Chaim is the cliff notes.
Well, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, right? Orach Chaim is the first section.
Shulchan Aruch is actually is a lot more detailed than the Orach Chaim.
The Orach Chaim is section 1 of Shulchan Aruch.
Right.
Of the 4. So here, look what the Beis Yosef says. Look what Rav Yosef Karo says. Ufarsha sakrobana. So this is Aleph. This is 1-1 in the Torah, the very first entry. It says it's good to say a bunch of things in the morning. The Akedah, and the 10 Commandments, the binding of Isaac, the 10 Commandments, and also Parshat HaKorbanot. So Rav Yosef Karo says about this, the parak based of Tainus, and the second parak of Tainus, Kav Sayin Amud Bez, and also the Sof parak B'nai Ir, at the end of the parak B'nai Ir in Megillah, Lamed Aleph Amud Bet. Oh, it's Ara Gemara. It's always exciting when they quote the thing you're learning. Amar Avram Lefnei Kadosh Baruch Hu. Avram says before God, Shema Yachtu Yisrael Lefanecha B'Tasleim Kanshe Dor Mabul. I'm worried, says Abraham. Maybe my descendants will sin and you will destroy them like the generation of the flood. Amar Lo. So God, Amar Le, God says back to Abraham, Love B'Meida. So God said, I'm not going to do that. And Abraham says, how will I know that you're not going to do that? B'Meida Ki Rashena. How will I know they inherit the land? The Brit Bein Habitarim, the covenant between the parts. Amar Le, Chali Agla Mishudashas, right? Take take a what you call it, a heifer, and make it in 3. Amar lefan of Ribbon Hashem tenach bismancha bisamidrash kayim. So that works when the Beis Hamikdash exists and you can have sacrifices, but you ain't Beis Hamikdash come, is quoting the Gemara in chunks here, not all of it. Mateleam, in other words, so the Gemara that's not quoted says that the sacrifices will protect them. And it quotes the verse in Jeremiah. So Amar Lake Vartikantalim Seder Karbonos Shekos Man Shekorim Behen Ma'alani Alem Ki'ilu Makrivim. So long as Israel reads the Karbanos, it will count as if they sacrificed them lefanai, before me. V'ani mochelem, and I will forgive them kol avonosem, all of their sins. So you see here that in addition to all of this was to say, in addition to this kind of midrash that the korbanos serve a protecting, that they serve to protect us, being the source for the custom to read a second Torah on Yontiv, it is also the source to read the korbanos before Shacharis.
Why all of them?
Why?
You don't do all of them every day. You do carbon Talmud every day. The other ones are more for specific purposes.
Right. So, some Sidurim have, if you have sinned, say this sin offering. Right. And if something as good has happened, say this Korban Todah. And you get the sense the Siddur wants you to treat reciting the Korbanot like you would bring them. Whenever you would bring a Korban in the old days, you would recite the Korban. I don't know how many people have that relationship to the Korbanos section of Shacharis.
I think most shuls that I've been in, either they skip it entirely, they say carbon Talmud, or they say all the Korbanos every day. It's one of the three. They don't say anything. They say carbon Talmud, or they say all three. All of them.
Yeah, and I will say I'm a flexitarian in this regard, but I do think it's good to always say something from the Korbanos. To me, it doesn't feel right to leave the whole section blank. And the Korban Tamid feels like the essential thing, the daily sacrifice, which this is all fact.
That makes sense. I agree with that.
And I would say at the bottom of the list is kind of Ezehu Makoman or those sorts of things.
Yeah.
For me personally, in terms of what happens, probably after the Korban Tamid, it could be the cleaning out of the ashes and maybe I suppose the Ketoret. The Ketoret were instituted at that point in Shacharit for plague. I think we've spoken about the role of Ketoret as being something that ameliorates plagues. And then some of the old Sidurim, after the Ketores in that part of Shacharis, they had a prayer to end Magifa, to end a plague that was extant. So I actually have started saying that sometimes just because there was a tradition really to lean into the Ketores in this part of Shacharis during plagues. But all right. Anyway, so I guess I just wanted to say that this Gemara is the source for both. Like, this is the source for reciting Korbanos in Shacharis. It's not some other. I mean, there are a few others, but this is probably the main source for that idea. Okay. Now we were a bit ahead, and we were discussing. Maybe we'll read it. Betanios brachos uklalos ve'ein mafsikim beklalos. So now we're setting the Mishnah again. On fast days, you read what reading? So we read Vayachal Moshe, but they read brachos uklalos, blessings and curses. And what Torah reading, just to review, since it was a few weeks, is blessings and curses. You remember?
So are you in the Gemara? Are you repeating the? Are you in?
I'm in the Gemara. I'm in Lamed Aleph Amud Bet. Betanios brachos uklalos ve'ein mafsikim beklalos. Do you see where that is?
Yep.
Yeah, oh, uh-huh.
Right here.
Yeah, got it.
So what they mean by this is the tochacha. On fast days, they would have you read the tochacha. And which tochacha? There's two,
The first one.
The first one
Yeah.
in Bechukosai, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Minahani Midai. So we did this once, but we'll do it since we were paused in the middle of it. How do we know this? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, Amar Rabbi Yasi Damar Kra. Musar Hashem B'ni Altimas. Now, how do we know what? So actually, the Gemara is asking a question about a part of the Mishnah it doesn't cite, but we read it earlier. The Mishnah taught us, and maybe Rashi helps us here. The Mishnah taught us that you're not allowed to skip in the Tochacha. Do you remember that?
Not allowed to interrupt it, right?
Yeah. Right. Bein mafsikin b'kol. So we have it right here. You can't interrupt. So minahani mila is not where do we, sorry. So when the Gemara wants to know how do we know this, what's this? This is not that on fast days we read the Tochacha. That they're taking for granted is sort of obvious, but rather that you can't interrupt the Tochacha. So Rabbi Chia bar Gamdam or Rabbi Yasi Damar Kra, because it says in Proverbs in Mishlei, Musar Hashem bini al timas. The rebuke or the ethical rebuke of God, my son, do not detest, do not hate God's rebuke. In other words, love the rebuke or don't hate the rebuke in the double negative. Rashi explains to us, al timas. Do you see Rashi here? I know I flipped to, this is like the Parshanim view. So you get a line of the Gemara and then all of the commentators. Rashi says, "Hamafsik bahen mareatz Moshe kashelo lekros." Someone who would interrupt, like have two aliyot, would make it look like it was upsetting for them or difficult to read. Uva masachet sofrim yalef lamisefet dekra va'al tikotz b'tochachto al ta'asu kotzim psukim leshon k'tzitza. So Rashi notes that in Masachet Sofrim, they prove it from the unquoted part of the verse in Mishlei. It says, the ethical rebuke of God, do not detest. And then it goes on to say at the end, Va'al tikotz b'tochachto, do not tikotz God's rebuke. So what does tikotz mean? Rashi says, quoting the Gemara there, Al ta'asu kotzin kotzin. Psukim l'shon k'tzitza, like don't jump around, read it all as one unit. So Rashi's just noting you could learn this out from the first part of the verse, or you could learn it out from the second part of the verse. And actually one Gemara, this one, seems to learn it from the first part of the verse. Another Gemara, the second part. They probably had a tradition that this verse meant this thing, and there are actually multiple ways to kind of derive it, if that makes sense. Tosafos, just to round out our education. You call one person for the whole Tochacha. It's a long aliyah. How many psukim?
Oh, I forget. I don't remember. 100? So, yeah.
I think it's 66. That's a long, I could be wrong. So Tosafos says you call one. So he quotes the Gemara there. V'amar Rabbi Yeshua d'Sachnin ani amarti mo anochi b'tzara v'imkein ein din shivarchuni banai al atzorot shelahem el yikra echad hakol v'yaschil b'davar acher v'yasayim b'davar acher v'yaz yuchal levarech tchila v'sof. So he also quotes this idea. Isn't it true that yivarchuni banai al atzoros, that my children should bless me for the tsaros? Why? Because I am with them in their struggle. So here we get Tosafos, the Hasidic Rebbe before the Hasidic movement here, quoting an idea, right? It says, well, look, when it's tough in the Tochacha, God is with you when it's tough. Now, there's something experientially true, I think, for a lot of people. There's no atheist in a foxhole, but I think a lot of us, like when you're going through a hard time, even though that's the hardest part of faith, that can be the easiest time to be open to tefillah or faith. I've seen it again and again with congregants. When people are going through a tough time, they start to show up to davening, and people look really serious in davening. Right? Have we all not experienced this? When things are rough, that's when the religion can be most helpful. So he just has this idea here that you could make a blessing on it, beginning and end, as a kind of unit. And the reason you can make a bracha on he's like wondering, how can you make a bracha on such a rough passage? And the answer is, Imo anochi b'tzara. God is with us in distress. So actually reading the Tochacha, Tosafos is reframing, is not really to like scare ourselves, but to remind us as we read it that God is still with us, even if the Tochacha happens. So that's an interesting idea that just comes out of there. Okay. I wanted to quote that because I thought it was interesting. Does everyone understand what he's kind of saying? Like,
Yeah.
why are we reading this? Are we reading it as a rebuke? Or are we reading it to remind us that God is with us even in this moment? Which are two different reasons to read it, yeah? Okay. Reish Lakish Amar. You see this?
Yeah. Next one. Next paragraph.
Amar, the fisha ena mibrach ala puranos, alehi avid. Right, so it's a different reason. You don't want to say a bracha, opposite line of thought. You don't want to say a bracha on puranos. Opposite thought. Don't want to say a blessing on something that's really difficult, on difficulties. Alehi avid. Tana kishu maschil matchil bepasuk shlefneim upshu misayim bepasuk shachran. So he disagrees with this Tanakama, with this first opinion, kind of, and Reish Lakish is saying, no, you have to start a pasuk early and finish a pasuk later, so that you're not making a bracha directly on the tochacha.
Which is our custom.
Which is our custom. Rashi and others will explain a pasuk lavdavka, meaning a little bit after, before. It doesn't have to be one. It might not be able to be one, depending on the other rules of where it is. Amar Abai. So Abai says, when we have Rav and Abai, normally, how do we rule? If they
Rabbi.
normally, right? If there's a dispute here, I don't know that's a dispute. Abai just amends and says, "Lo shanu elek b'kol sheb'Torah's kohanim, v'kol sheb'Mishnah Torah posek." Abai says, and this is new. We're now in new material.
This responds to Reish Lakish, not Rabbi.
Sorry. Yes, the response to Reish Lakish. Lo shanu elek. Good point. Okay, sorry. This thing that Reish Lakish taught, or sorry, that the Mishnah taught in Mafsikim Baklalos, it was only in relation to the first Tochacha in Bechukosai, not in Kisavo. Only the one Shebetoras Kohanim, and you may remember, Torat Kohanim is the rabbinic name for Leviticus, for Vayikra, the Torah of the priests, because that's what it's about. Aval Klalos Mishnah Torah, but the curse is in the Mishnah Torah, Posek. You can interrupt the ones in Kitavo. My Taima, what's the difference? What's the difference between one and the other? Before we get the Gemara's answer, does anyone want to say anything, or should we just hear the Gemara's answer? Does everyone understand the Gemara's Reish Lakish's distinction? That one of them you have to have one aliyah, but the other you could interrupt.
What's our custom?
Our custom is to interrupt neither.
That's what I thought. Okay.
We interrupt.
Is that the norm in most shuls?
Yeah, so you'll see here, for example, the Rambam. Do we see the Rambam?
Yep.
The curse is in Vayikra, in Leviticus, in Mafsikin b'hem elachad koreos, on one person, matzchil b'pasuk shlefneinu misayim b'pasuk lachrem, which Reish Lakish's amendment, start a pasuk early, end a pasuk late. Ukalo sheb'Mishnah Torah, in Batzal Sokbam Posek, the curses in Deuteronomy, if you want, you could interrupt them and do many aliyot. But there's already a custom, a national custom, not to do that, but to have one person read it. So you see that already, in the 11th century, the Rambam could write and say, Nahagu ha'am, right? The whole nation is accustomed not to. So I suppose the answer to your question, Rina, is everyone does what we do. Now, it's not the halacha, the Rambam's just noting. The halacha is, you can interrupt and do two aliyot there. Um, watch, one year we're gonna need a Hosafa. Someone's gonna have a bar mitzvah on Kitavo, and someone's
Then
gonna
you
ask me
can't,
if
you're
we
gonna
could
need
do it.
10 or something.
Yeah, and you're gonna ask me if we could do it that week, and we're gonna have to come up. So you'll know, like I know, that the halacha is you can, but the minhag, the
You'll
universal
remember, but
minhag.
I won't. You'll remember, but I won't.
Well, now that I've said it, maybe we'll all remember. So that's the answer to your question.
Thank you.
It's a good question. Okay, so what's the difference? So we got a Gemara. The Gemara has an answer. Halalu b'lishon Rabbi. Now this is a very controversial answer. It prompts waves of commentary. Halalu b'lishon Rabbi Mamuros u'Moshe mipi Agvur Amran. Halalu b'lishon Yachin Amuros u'Moshe mipi Atzman Amran. Okay, the ones in Vayikra are different in two ways. First, they were said in plural. In other words, if I'm trying to give you an example. Im lo tishme'u li v'lo ta'asu et kol hamitzvot v'kparti alechem behala uzratem larik zarachem, etc. It's all in plural. You, all of you, all of you, all of you. Whereas the ones in Deuteronomy are Yadbek Hashem decha, right? They are in the singular, to use singular, visigucha, and they overtake you personally. So one of them is speaking to the whole nation and one of them is speaking to an individual. So it sounds like the one that's speaking to the whole nation is a stronger language. So it's a stronger rebuke. Does that make sense? It's a tougher rebuke. It's speaking to everyone all at once. It's collective punishment. Whereas Devarim might not be collective punishment. It might be speaking to you as an individual. And most the ones in Vayikra, Moshe mipi Gvura Amran. Moshe said them from the mouth of God. Moshe was quoting God. And you see that because Moshe sounds like God. In other words, the Tochacha sounds like God speaking. Im lo tishme'u li. If you don't listen to me. That's not Moshe saying if you don't listen to me, Moshe. That's God saying if you don't listen to me through the mouth of Moshe. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Im lo tishme'u li. Moshe doesn't care if you listen to him. I mean, I probably would like that, but he's speaking as God. Whereas in the other Tochacha, Yadbek Hashem becha. God will give you this. God, Moshe speaking in the third person about God. And so the Gemara says, Moshe mipi atzmo amran. Moshe made them up himself. So this is where all the controversy starts. The first Tochacha was really God speaking, but the second Tochacha is really Moshe's Tochacha. So what's the obvious question about this? Moshe mipi atzmo.
How can Moshe take it upon himself to be that, say this is what's going to happen to you. This is what God's going to do to you if you don't follow the all the mitzvot. This is what's going to happen to you, implying it's a possibility that he might be implying, I am going to do this to you some way.
Right. It sounds like, so this is the place where all the commentators go off on exactly what is the nature of the prophecy of the Torah here. It's this very piece of Gemara. We're not going to do we could do a whole series on different opinions about it. Wait, when Moshe was speaking, was that God telling him what to say? Was that God speaking from within his mouth? Or it sounds like here, Moshe mipi atzmo amran. Moshe said it himself. Sounds like it's not God. It's just Moshe speaking.
The whole thing is Moshe's discourse. It's Moshe speaking to the people before I die.
Right. So you can ask the question stronger. Isn't that all of Sefer Devarim? Sorry, right. Is that
right?
So okay. So just to see a few things here. So, let's see Rashi first. Rashi, Moshe mi pi gvura amran. Do you see this? Should at least see Rashi and
Yep.
Tosafos and maybe a few
Yep.
other things. So Rashi says, "V'na'asa shliach lomar kach." So the first one, Moshe was a shliach, a messenger, to say the Tochacha and V'ikra. Amar li Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shamei amurim b'lashon v'nasati v'kparati v'shilachti mishech yecholet biyado la'asot. So the first one, Moshe spoke as if he were God. Only Moshe could do that. Aval b'Mishnah Torah, but in Devarim, K'tiv Yakecha Hashem. Hashem will strike you. A big Hashem becha. God will cause to cleave to you. Moshe Amran me'elav. Im tavru mitzvotav hu yakpid alechem. If you violate the mitzvahs, God is going to be angry at you. Moshe was just telling them. In other words, so Rashi says, Moshe was just telling you, if you violate the mitzvahs, God's going to be pissed. That's basically what the second one is. But it's just Moshe telling you. And so Rashi, everyone, like recasts Rashi. Yeah. Rashi sounds like there's no serious qualification to this, right? He just understands that Moshe said Devarim more or less on his own. One working theory of this is Moshe said it on his own. And so you might ask, does that get in the Torah? So the answer is, well, God decided after the fact to put Moshe's speeches in the Torah. Does that make sense? In other words, Moshe gave speeches, and then God said, I think those deserve to go in the Torah too. That's probably the working theory that goes best with Rashi, that Moshe said him fully on his own at the time. There was no prophecy here, just so you understand. This is not a prophetic statement. This is Moshe Amran Me'elav. Moshe said himself, Im tavru al mitzotav hu yakpid alechem. If you violate God's commandments, he might be angry. Tosafos, Moshe Me'atzmo Amran. Moshe said them himself, Uveruach HaKodesh. Tosafos can't countenance this idea. So he says, no, Moshe said them divinely inspired. It was divinely inspired speech. That's a disagreement.
Who did you say couldn't stomach it?
Tosafos couldn't stomach the idea in Rashi that
Oh,
Moshe.
Rashi said that, right, okay.
So Tosafos says, Moshe said them himself, Beruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration. Moshe, look, it's not like Moshe made this stuff up. So, I mean, there really is a fundamental disagreement here about Moshe's level of autonomy over the speeches in Devarim. You can see it here. There's a lot to say. We could see a Ramban. If I click show additional commentaries, it will be the end. So unless you want to go down that rabbit hole, I think you've seen two representative views.
I assume that's where a lot of the Bible critics come up with saying that Devarim, especially Devarim, was written in that God didn't write Devarim because
I mean, it sounds from here, even like Rashi and the Gemara don't think that God did Devarim. It sounds like Moshe said Devarim himself is what the plain text of the Gemara is. Moshe said Devarim himself. You have to then do apologetics to come up with God saying it, which some want to do. Okay.
Are there any new mitzvot in Devarim that weren't in the first four? Sefarim?
No.
So in other words, there's no mitzvah deraisa that's coming out of Devarim.
Maybe to write a Sefer Torah.
Okay.
Because
that's where I can see the biggest controversy would be if there was a mitzvah deraisa coming from Devarim, then you'd have all these,
Now, to be clear, even for Rashi, he must have thought that God sanctioned it into the Torah. In other words, Moshe probably gave many speeches in his life, not all of which are recorded in the Torah. In fact, there was an apocryphal book that was read, but there are many speeches of Moshe in Sefer Yovel, the Book of Jubilees, and other books that aren't in the Bible, but medieval commentators like Ramban and others didn't think were necessarily false. They just didn't think they were canonical. So we have other recorded episodes, or there's Sefer Milchamot Hashem, the Book of the Wars of the Lord, which is referenced at different points in the Torah, and some versions of certain copies of it clearly have other parts of the Moshe story. So the point I guess I'm making is that even if Moshe said it himself, not everything Moshe did himself is in the Torah. So the Torah still would maintain its religious significance for Rashi. You must imagine. It's hard to imagine Rashi thinking Moshe just gave speeches and decided these should go in the Torah without consultation with God, given his one-on-one relationship and all. Okay. We'll move on.
We're losing you.
Oh, do you have me?
Now I have you.
No,
Okay. Oh, it says my internet connection is unstable. Hopefully you still have me.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right now we do.
Okay. Levi Barbuti avakare v'kamegamgem kameda Rav Huna ba'arure. So we have this Levi Barbuti. He was reading the Torah, and he was reading the curses in the Mishnah Torah in Devarim.
Okay.
But he was migamgem. He was stumbling before Rav Huna for the arur, for the curses. So you understand what he was? He didn't prepare the laning well. He was struggling the lane.
Right.
Anyone familiar with this? It's ever happened to
No.
congregation Beshalom? Amar lo. So Rav Huna said to him, "Akanavshach." Akanavshach lo shanu ala kol shabbatos kohanim os Mishnah Torah posik. So Rav Huna told him, you know, if you need a break, take a break. Yeah, because we're allowed in the klalos, the curses of Devarim, to interrupt. So you see, by the way, you get a sense for how the Aliyot used to be divided, which was that people would read until they started struggling to keep going, and then they would break and maybe someone else would carry on, or that kind of thing. Yeah, like before the professional ball Kriya system. We're reverting back to something close to this. So that was the system. So this is just, the Gemara is just quoting this story because this was a live story that happened related to this halacha, where the halacha came in useful, which was that the Baal Koreh couldn't read. So they decided, Rav Huna told him, why don't you take a break and the aliyah here since you're struggling. Okay. Tanya, so we're gonna keep going on unless anyone has anything they want to say. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Ezra Tikkun LaMitzvah, Shu Kohen Kol Shabbatos Kohanim Kodem Atzeres, Mishnah Torah Kodem Rosh Hashanah. So Ezra made a takana that you should read the curses in Vayikra before Shavuos, and you should read the curses in Devarim sometime before Rosh Hashanah. Do we do that?
No.
No. No, we don't. All right, well, let's finish this and then we'll say more about it. Okay. So my taima, what's the reason for the takana that Ezra made? We'll figure out if we followed it or not. Rabbi, Itamar Reish Lakish, Rabbi said, but some say Reish Lakish said, Kadesh shetichle hashana vekilulo seha, so that the year and its curses should end. In other words, if you read the curses right before the end of the year, and Shavuos is the end of the year for what purpose?
Shavuos is the end of the year. I don't know. Agricultural year?
Yeah, for first fruits, for bikurim, right? Your first fruits are brought on Shavuos, and so we'll get into Atzeres is a Rosh Hashanah. How do we know that Shavuos is a Rosh Hashanah for the fruits of the tree? And Rosh Hashanah obviously is the new year for everything that Rosh Hashanah is the new year for. Are people familiar with this phrase, Techla Shana V'Kila Losea? I mean, it's a greeting. It's practically a holiday card greeting at this point, no?
Yeah.
Right? The year and its curses should end. It also is the refrain of a piyut, of a song that was recited on Mariv, on Rosh Hashanah, in the Maravos. We don't do Maravos in our shul ever, did we? Anyone
No.
ever been in a place where they do, you know, Maravos?
Yeah, I never been sure what he did.
You know what Maravos are?
What
No.
is it?
Yeah, so there are different names for piyutim that made the davening longer. So for example, if the piyut is in the bracha Yotzer Or, Uvorei Choshech, Oseh Shalom, Uvorei Takol, they're called Yotzros. I think people are familiar with Yotzros because there are still some places that say Yotzros a lot. Now we say Yotzros on 2 occasions. We say Yotzros on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in our shul, right? And when you're going to do that, you don't start Yotzer or Uvorei Choshech, Oseh Shalom, Uvorei Takol. You start or Olam, you know, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And instead of, you know, you have a longer list of angels that do things. You say a different text, and then you have piyutim. So all those things we say in Shachris at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So there were yotzros written for everything, for Shabbos Agadol and Parshas Para, and you know, for every special thing under the sun, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and a lot of communities said them or didn't say them. I think the only place they're commonly said still in most places is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In Israel, a lot of places still say them on Shavuos. I've seen. In Mariv, there were really common poems in the first bracha of Mariv, Hamariv Aravim, that were called Maravos. And if you ever daven from like the Art Scroll or Koren Machzor, not the Siddur for holidays, but the Machzor will have the Maravos. They're always in the, you know, the section. And there are other additions to, like whenever there's a piyut, a poem addition to a section, those poems are classified after the section. Anyway, so Tichle Shana V'Kila Losea, this idea that the year and its curses should end, is one of the maravos for Rosh Hashanah. Achoti Kala, I think it's called Little Sister. A lot of Israeli, like Moroccan artists have different versions of it now because it's like an Israeli pop song. But before it was an Israeli pop song, it was in the maravos. So if you Google it, you'll probably find all of these different Israeli pop stars covering it. Okay, so let's just okay. So when do we say these readings?
Which reads?
Like Ezra decreed that you should read them.
We don't read them except when they come up. There's no special occasions that we read them.
Right. Okay. So we don't have special occasions that we read them. And when do they come up? Whenever they come up.
When they come up. Soon.
Wanna. Okay, I'll read the note from the Art Scroll Hebrew. It's a helpful note. Lefi min hagenu. Again, Art Scroll English and Art Scroll Hebrew are really different. For example, Art Scroll Hebrew leaves the controversial Rashi about Torah where it is. And I believe the Art Scroll English doesn't mention the Rashi that Moshe said Devarim by himself. They also have great notes. So the Art Scroll Hebrew tells us, according to our custom today, we don't read the Klalos of Vayikra near Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, and of Devarim near Rosh Hashanah. Osim Hafsek Shel Shabbat B'nehem, but rather we read them one Shabbos off. According Parshas Bamidbar, in a normal year, we read Bamidbar, Shia Parshas Shel Achar Parshas B'Chuk Osai, B'Shabbos Lifnei Shavuos. So normally, and this year's a leap year, it's all off, but in a normal year, the Kriya before Shavuos is Bamidbar. Did people know that?
No, I
In
shouldn't.
a normal year, the reading before Shavuos has always been Midbar, which is 2 after. B'Shabbos Lifnei Shavuos, Parshas Nitzavim or Nitzavim Vayelech, and the one before Rosh Hashanah, we do Nitzavim Vayelech, which is the one right after Kitavo, which is where the Tochach is. So again, we're 2 off. Put on Rosh Hashanah. For a different reason, so as not to join the curses to the Yom Hadin. Like you don't want to read the Tochacha before, different idea. You don't want to read the Tochacha right before Rosh Hashanah because God might say, okay, you've been naughty and look what it says. It should happen to you. So great, terrible year ahead, God forbid. So rather, there's like a fulfillment of this takana, but it's done a week off. Now, what question might you be asking? You might be asking, wait a second. Are we talking here about Bavel or Eretz Yisrael? Because in Bavel, they read the Torah every 3 years, but in Eretz Yisrael, how often did they read the Torah? Oh, sorry, in Bavel, they read the Torah every year. I gave it away. But in Eretz Yisrael, what was the custom? To read it every 3 years. So what did they do with this takana? So the Rav Yonasan Eibschitz writes that in Eretz Yisrael, these were special Shabboses. In other words, even though they only finished the Torah every 3 years, according to the triennial cycle, they always made sure to read the Tochachas in any event before Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah. Is there a place in town that's doing a triennial cycle?
Well, I
think
think
there is.
Doesn't Emmanuel do that?
Emmanuel. So we should ask them.
Temple Emmanuel does, yeah.
Yeah.
I do believe so. So I wonder, do if they interrupt to read this this idea. So I have a question. Why these 2 Rosh Hashanahs? There are many Rosh Hashanahs. There's a Rosh Hashanah of the trees, Tu B'Shvat.
Rosh Hashanah of
There's Nisan, which is the
right.
Rosh Hashanah for the biblical year. Shavuos, which is the first fruits. I don't know. That doesn't seem like the most prominent, as Rashi explains. Shuzman Katsir, Uzman Pirot Tailan, it's the time of the harvest and the first fruits. And by the way, Tosafos gives this whole description here about how we don't do exactly like this, but we do it a little differently, like what I said. Okay.
I'm going ahead. Read it. 12.
Okay. So if anyone has anything else to say, but in any event, this is interesting and probably something you didn't know was the thing. I did not know was the thing before this Gemara. So now you know, before these holidays you read. If anyone has an answer to like why these things in particular. Rosh Hashanah, I get why you want to read the Tochacha before Rosh Hashanah, to inspire repentance. I don't get why you want to read the Tochacha before Shavuos.
To make you think more, I don't know, you're receiving the Torah, so think about what you've been doing.
Right, I guess, right. You could look at it 2 ways, right? Receiving the Torah, or also like if it's your wheat and your real like your harvest festival, that's where it could all go wrong. You know what I mean? When you have your bounty, that's where kind of sinful behavior and a lack of gratitude could really set in. Maybe it's like higher risk. Okay.
Next one's written for me, Zakanim.
Well, Bishlama should be Mishnah Torah. Where, what are you saying?
The next
Oh,
Gemara is
we're
written for
almost
me.
there. We're almost there. We have 2 lines. You're not that old. We'll get to it tonight. So Bishlama, so the Gemara asked the question first. Bishlama should be Mishnah Torah. Maybe the ones in Devarim, because it's the end of the year. Torah's Kohanim. How does that work? Atu Atzeres Rosh Hashanah is Shavuos Rosh Hashanah. I never heard of Shavuos as Rosh Hashanah. Asked the Gemara. Says the Gemara, and yes, Shavuos is also Rosh Hashanah. Atzeres Nami Rosh Hashanah. He Disnan. Atzeres HaPelos Ilam. We taught in Rosh Hashanah that on Shavuos you're judged for the Peros HaIlan, for the fruit of the tree. And it's considered like a Rosh Hashanah. Okay, now this is for you, Donnie. I mean, it's not for you, but you say it's for you. Tanya. So it was taught in a Tosafta, in a Avodah Zarah. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Everyone see where we are? If when you ask advice, the elders tell you, Sitor Violadim B'nai. Sitor Vialativne. So look, if the old people tell you to do something, and it sounds like what they tell you is to destroy something, and the children tell you to build something. In other words, the advice of the old people seems like they don't know what they're talking about, and they're going to cause destruction with it. And the kids, even though they're little, their advice seems like it's going to be constructive. You should listen to the elders. Destroy and don't build. Maybe the elders know something. The Gemara says when the elders have you destroy something, that's called building. And when you think you're building at the advice of kids, it's really going to lead to destruction. V'siman ladavar rechavam ben Shlomo. And what's the sign of this matter? The wicked king, Rechavam, who listened not to the elders, and wound up dividing the entire kingdom of Israel. What's the story? People know about Rechavam?
I know something, but I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, so when Rechavam, I'll read again a helpful note. When Rechavam inherited the kingdom, they already had a difficult burden in terms of taxes and labor. Rechavam notes first he sought advice from the elders, and they advised him to cease asking more things from the people. Then he sought advice from younger folk, children. I said, so the Ha'amis owed, and they said more taxes. Listen to them, and the rest is history. So, do we agree with this advice of the Gemara? Always listen to the elders, even if it seems like their advice will lead to total destruction, and even if the advice of the youngins is seemingly more cogent. Nonetheless, always listen to the elders, says the Gemara. And why is this here? What is this doing here?
Well, you didn't become a Tana or an Amora until you had studied a long time. You were that may not be old, but you were getting there, and the whole Gemara is based on the wisdom of the Amoraim and the Tanaim. So maybe that's it. I don't know.
This doesn't seem logical. Demolishing, what does it say?
It doesn't make sense. That makes
Demolishing
no
of
sense.
old men is ultimately as constructive as building.
Yeah, the Gemara is basically saying that in the long run, the advice of the elders is always smart and the advice of the young kids is always bad, even if it seems obvious that it's not true.
Gemara, I've always said Gemara is very, very intelligent.
So like you were saying, Donnie, we'll all just, are you the oldest one here?
No, here right now, yeah. But no.
So we all just have to listen to you no matter what you tell us. That's the conclusion of this Gemara.
He's much older than I am.
I'll just read one more thing and then he's much older than you?
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Tanu Rabbanan. So for 6 weeks of the year, he's older than you. Tanu Rabbanan. Makom shemafsikim b'Shabbat shachris shem koren b'mincha shem koren b'sheni shem koren b'chamishi shem koren l'Shabbos haba. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, makom shemafsikim b'Shabbat shachris shem koren b'mincha uv'sheni uv'chamishi l'Shabbos haba. Amar Rabbi Zera halacha makom shemafsikim b'Shabbat shachris shem koren b'mincha uv'sheni uv'chamishi l'Shabbos haba. V'lei halacha Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to go through this next time. I just want to say we made to the end of the Amud so that I know we're going to finish next time. And this is a debate. How do we divide our reading? Is it that you read sequentially? The place where you end on Shabbos, you pick up there at Mincha, and wherever you end at Mincha, you pick up there on Monday, and wherever you end on Monday, you pick up there and keep going forward on Thursday. Wherever you end on Thursday, that's where you pick up on Shabbos morning. In other words, every day you read a little bit of the Parsha, and Shabbos you only have to read like a quarter. Wouldn't that be nice? If on Shabbos Mincha you read a quarter, on Monday you read a quarter, Thursday you read a quarter, and on Shabbos you finished it. That would be easy.
You. It would be nice for you.
Wouldn't that be nice? That was the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Yehuda felt no. You read Shabbos morning, and then you pick up and read the first Aliyah at Mincha, and then again on Monday morning, and then again on Thursday morning, and then you read the whole thing on the next Shabbos. And Rabbi Zera knows that that's the halacha. We could go more into that debate if we want, and do a little, advanced what's the debate really about. So we'll pick up with that next time. And then just so you see what's left. We'll go through a little bit of how to have an aliyah and certain things, and we're going to basically end the Gemara next time. We'll even start the next Masechta probably. There's just not a lot left. One thing you should know though, is the end of this Gemara, since Pesach is coming. Moshe tikkun l'Yisrael sholim v'dorshim b'nyan yom alach hilchos Pesach. It says hilchos chag b'chag. Oh, well, okay. That's also quoted about 30 days before. It's 30 days before Pesach. You should be learning about Pesach now in your private learning. But next time we'll finish. So thank you everyone for this wonderful night of Tuesday night Talmud. Continuing to understand, if you're wondering what did we do tonight exactly? We continue to understand why it is we do what we do in shul in regards to the Torah readings, and also threw in a bit of advice, which is that you should always listen to old people, even if their advice seems absolutely opposite of sane. That's what the Gemara said. And there we have it. All right. Good night.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.
Good night.